Welcome to my channel MS is Great. In this video we're going to create a string comparison using a C# code and how to use the string comparison within the Power Automate. In Power Automate we already have a comparison operator, or in the conditions you can always check whether the two strings are equal. But here we are trying to achieve additional specific to the string comparison, and we have a choice to say that whether it has to compare with the lowercase or the uppercase. So for this scenario we're going to use a C# function, and based on the case sensitive or insensitive, there will be a boolean value to check the value. Let's start creating it. So for creating string functions, we're going to use the custom connector. I already have a video on how to create a custom connector. This is a basic video on how to create a custom connector. We're going to follow a similar step for creating a custom connectors. I will include this video in the description later in the current video, so that you can follow this to create a basic custom connectors. So once you know how to create a custom connectors, we can create a string comparison function easily within a custom connector. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new custom connector. Maybe I would call it as string functions. Continue. You can add an icon to the custom connector. For the demo purpose I will not add for now. You can even add icon, background colors, and description, all the string functions. And again you should have a host name. This host name is not needed for the C# code. Let me move on to security. We are not doing any authorization or authentication. So now I am going to add a function which would do the same string comparison. So for that we can name the function. So naming a function, I'm going to use compare string, and it is going to compare strings and return boolean. True for matching strings, false for not matched. Okay, and operation ID is a unique ID. So here I'm going to use compare string. That is the name of the operation, and I'm going to create a request. So click on the request and post. URL should be https:// is some dummy URL, and this is where, which is very important, you should use the functions with the parameters. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have 3 parameters, so that I can pass the value. So let me have the JSON for 3 parameters. The first parameter is like string 1, which is a string. It has to be a name. Oops, let me put it as string 1, and then the string 2, and finally I'm going to use ignore case as a boolean. So this will be a boolean, so which is like true. And that's it. Okay, so last one should not have comma. Okay, I created a boolean body is invalid. Why? Because maybe the true is case sensitive. Okay, yeah, so I added as a boolean. This is how the parameters going to be. When I import it, I can go and edit the parameters. So ignore case is there, so ignore case is let me have ignore case, default value is true, and this is required, and these are the values it takes. So you can customize these parameters. So for me, I'm going to say that by default I'm passing the true value, meaning it will always ignore the case when you don't pass the value, and this parameter is mandatory. And similarly for string 1, let me have string 1 here, which is a title. Default value is nothing, and it's a required field, and it is a string value. And similarly for string 2, I just mark it as string 2 for title, and it is a required value. That's it. Okay, so now all the parameters are set, and let me check the validation. True, yes. AI plugin preview, we are not using it. So now we come to the main part of the programming. This is the code where we need to do the C# coding. Let me enable the code and make sure that you select for this method. And here, if you see here, this is just the hello text. I'm going to remove this completely. Now I'm going to add a code for string comparison. So the first step is to get the parameter value. As you can see here, to get the parameter value, make sure that you use this one. Let me increase it to 110 so that you can see. So basically this is like the current context, whatever the request comes in, and the content, I'm just reading it as a string. So once you read it as a string, you will have to parse into a JSON format so that it is easy for you to get the value. So we are getting the content and just parsing it as a JSON. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to get all three parameters. So the first parameter name is called string 1, second parameter is string 2, and the ignore case. So I'm going to typecast it to the relevant type and just store it into a variable. So now we have all three variables or the parameters which are being passed from the Power Automate. Now we need to write a original code. So the code to compare the string in C#. So basically I am declaring a boolean variable whether to check whether it is both string are equal. If we ignore a case, then we do the first and the second string comparison using string compare ordinal ignore case. So this is C#, simple C# code which will ignore the case and compare the string, and in case if it is false, then it will just make sure that it uses the case sensitive. And finally what I'm going to do is that I'm going to return true or false, so based on the value. So for that you need this code. You create a HTTP response, then string content, and make sure that you convert that into a string. The return value, which is a boolean value, convert it into a string and it will return. So this is how it is, simple C# code to compare string operations. Let me test it. You must create a connector to test it. So let's create a connector. Okay, so there is no description to the connector. Let me go back to the general. We need a description, all the string functions, string compare operations, which is here. Next, definition should be here. So by now we have a code here and we'll test it. Let's see whether it works. Create connector. So what it does is it will compile the code and have the C# code ready by the time. Okay, successfully created the connector. So now if you can see here, you can see the details here, and by default it is true. So to test it, you really need to create a connection. Just create one connection for testing. It will automatically create a connection. So now I can test send the mail and send the mail. So these two strings are equal, and I'm just ignoring the case, so we should get true. Okay, so the return value is true, which is success. And now if I pass false, so meaning that it should get false. It is case sensitive. Okay, it returns false. If I convert this string to small case and then try to do the test operation, it will give me true, because it's now both are true. Okay, so this how you would create a C# code. Let me test it in the original Power Automate now. Let's go back to my flow, and then we'll create a flow to test it. So just create a new flow, instant flow, string compare, create new flow. And now what we do is that we try to add an action, which is custom action. Maybe filter it. You have custom string function, add the function here. So you can see that it shows 3 parameters, all set, and by default it shows by drop down because we set it as a boolean, so you'll have yes and no here. So string 1, I'm going to say hash ms is great, and string 2 hash ms is great. Okay, so I'm ignoring the case, so it should return you true. Let's save it and test it. Successfully saved. I'm going to test this. Manual operation. Continue and then run the flow. Takes a while to execute. This is the only operation which is here. Successfully run, and you can see this is the input and the output is true because it ignored the case, and then it is comparing these two strings. Let's test the. So now we just specify that don't ignore a case, so meaning that these two strings are not same because it is case sensitive now. Let's save it and then try to execute again. Successfully saved. Now let's test it. Run the flow. So now it should execute the flow. Successfully ran. So now we have the same input and the output should be false, and it succeeded and it's false. Okay, so this is how we do the C# code for a custom connector. I will share the code within the GitHub and paste the link in the description. You can find the original code and then you can copy paste and make use of it. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and like.